There's a transaction happening every day that most people never notice. It's not written in contracts or enforced by law, but it governs nearly every social interaction you participate in. The terms are simple. You give away a piece of your autonomy in exchange for acceptance, approval, or the illusion of belonging. Most people sign without reading. They don't realize they're negotiating. They don't understand what they're trading until it's already gone. But there's a particular kind of person who refuses the deal entirely, not because they're antisocial or damaged, not because they can't connect with others, but because they've calculated the cost and decided it's too high. They've learned to stand alone, and in doing so, they've made themselves impossible to own. Society calls this dangerous, and society is right. The transaction most people accept without question goes like this. You modify your behavior, soften your opinions, adjust your preferences, all in exchange for social currency. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You nod at ideas you don't believe. You attend events you don't enjoy. You maintain relationships that drain you. The price seems small at first, a little compromise here, a minor adjustment there, but the compound interest is brutal. Over time, you realize you're not just compromising, you're negotiating your identity in real time, constantly reading the room, checking for approval, adjusting your presentation based on who's watching. You've outsourced your sense of self to a committee that never stops deliberating. And the worst part is that you've forgotten there was ever an alternative. The man who stands alone remembers, or perhaps he never forgot. He looks at the social marketplace and sees it clearly. A system designed to trade autonomy for belonging, independence for validation, clarity for comfort. He sees people mortgaging their self-respect for likes, trading their convictions for acceptance, selling their peace of mind for the privilege of fitting in. And he walks away from the table. This isn't a rejection of connection itself. It's a rejection of connection as transaction, relationship as leverage, belonging as control mechanism. He understands something fundamental. Any bond that requires you to diminish yourself is not a bond worth having. Any acceptance that demands you become someone else is not acceptance at all. Here's what makes this threatening. When someone doesn't need your approval, you have no leverage over them. When someone doesn't fear rejection, you can't use belonging as a bargaining chip. When someone is complete within themselves, you can't sell them the idea that they're incomplete. This person has removed themselves from a game that depends on everyone playing. The mechanics of this are straightforward once you see them. Most social control operates through the threat of exclusion. Conform or be cast out. Agree or be isolated. Comply or face rejection. The entire architecture of social pressure assumes one thing, that being alone is worse than being controlled, that solitude is a punishment rather than a choice, that independence is loneliness by another name. But what happens when someone doesn't experience solitude as punishment? What happens when being alone feels better than being managed, monitored, or manipulated? What happens when someone genuinely prefers their own company to the exhausting performance required by social acceptance? The system loses its primary tool. The threat becomes meaningless. The person becomes ungovernable. This is not the same as isolation born from inability or pain. There's a difference between someone who can't connect and someone who won't be owned. The former is running from something. The latter is running toward something. The distinction matters because the outcomes are completely opposite. One leads to desperation, the other leads to sovereignty. The person who chooses solitude has usually spent significant time in the alternative. They've participated in the social marketplace. They've tried the transaction. They've felt the weight of constantly managing other people's perceptions, the exhaustion of perpetual performance, the slow erosion of self that comes from trading authenticity for approval. And at some point, they did the calculation differently. They realized the cost was greater than the benefit. They understood that what they were gaining wasn't worth what they were losing. That realization changes everything, because once you see the transaction clearly, once you understand the terms you've been accepting, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to unconscious compliance. You either renegotiate or you leave the table entirely. Most people renegotiate. They try to get better terms, more favorable conditions, a slightly better deal. They work on boundaries, practice assertiveness, attempt to maintain their sense of self while still playing the game. And sometimes that works. Sometimes they find genuine connection that doesn't require them to shrink. But often, they're just learning to lose more slowly. The man who stands alone has made a different choice. He's left the table. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. He's recognized that the game itself is the problem, not his position in it. He's understood that any system requiring constant validation from others is a system designed to keep you dependent. And dependency, however dressed up in the language of community and connection, is still dependency. This is where it becomes genuinely threatening to established systems, because those systems, social, economic, political, all depend on a baseline level of need. They require people who want something badly enough to be willing to compromise for it. They need consumers seeking fulfillment through purchase, citizens seeking identity through ideology, individuals seeking worth through status. The entire machinery assumes hunger, but the person who is satisfied within themselves isn't hungry. They don't need the product, the position, the approval. They're not motivated by the promise of acceptance because they've already accepted themselves. They're not driven by the fear of rejection because they've already chosen solitude. They've found something that most people spend their entire lives seeking externally. They've found peace internally. This internal peace is not passivity. It's not resignation or defeat. It's the opposite. It's the foundation of genuine strength. Because when you're not constantly seeking validation, you can focus on what actually matters. When you're not performing for approval, you can direct that energy toward creation. When you're not managing perceptions, you can pursue truth. You become effective precisely because you're no longer distracted by the need to be liked. The irony is profound. The person who stops seeking connection often finds deeper connection than those who chase it desperately. The person who doesn't need approval often earns more respect than those who beg for it. The person who is complete alone often attracts others naturally, effortlessly, without trying. But here's the key. They're not doing it for that outcome. The attraction is a side effect, not the goal. They've genuinely stopped caring, and that genuine indifference is what makes the difference. You can't fake this. You can't perform independence while still craving approval. You can't pretend not to need validation while constantly checking for it. The distinction between authentic solitude and performed aloofness is immediately visible to anyone paying attention. One comes from wholeness, the other comes from wound. One is chosen, the other is defended. One is peaceful, the other is brittle. The man who truly stands alone doesn't announce it. He doesn't need you to know he doesn't need you. He's not trying to prove anything because he has nothing to prove. He's simply living from a different operating system, one that doesn't require external input to function. He's found his center of gravity within himself, and once you find that, once you locate that internal stability, everything changes. You stop being negotiable. You stop being available for manipulation through guilt, shame, or social pressure. You stop modifying yourself to fit expectations you never agreed to. You start making decisions based on internal coherence rather than external approval. You start choosing relationships that enhance you rather than complete you. You start living from clarity instead of fear. This is what makes you impossible to own. Not that you're isolated, not that you're unreachable, not that you refuse all connection, but that you've removed the hooks that others use to control. You've eliminated the dependencies that make manipulation possible. You've built something inside yourself that doesn't require outside maintenance. You've become self-sustaining, and in a world built on manufactured need, on cultivated dependence, on systematic incompleteness, being self-sustaining is the most radical position you can take. It's not aggressive, it's not hostile, it's simply complete. And completion, genuine completion, is revolutionary because it refuses participation in a system that depends on your perpetual hunger. This is why the man who stands alone can't be owned. Not because he's stronger, not because he's better, not because he's special, but because he's whole. And you cannot leverage what is already complete. You cannot manipulate what doesn't need. You cannot control what has found peace within itself. The transaction requires both parties. He simply declined to participate. And that refusal, quiet and final, is the most powerful position there is.